Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the IAPD webinar. It's titled One Standard, Two Industries, Building Trust Through Compliance and Debt Settlement and Collections. Today's conversation is an important one. While debt settlement and credit and collections operate differently, one representing the consumer and the other focused on creditor recovery, both industries are ultimately judged by one standard, which is consumer protection. And that's where we often see friction, miscommunication, lack of trust, inconsistencies, and how compliance is understood and applied. But here's the key takeaway we're going to explore today. Compliance isn't the barrier, it's the bridge. Throughout this session, we're going to dive into how both industries can better align, reducing legal risk, improving communication, and most importantly, creating a better outcome for the consumer. We have an outstanding group of panelists here today, bringing their perspectives from legal, regulatory, operational, and technology sides of the industry. And I'm excited to get this started. So let's start with some introductions. Let everybody introduce themselves with their title and their what they do for their companies. And let's start with Felix Shikovich. You're the first one I see.
Thanks, Renauld. Thanks for having me here. My name is Felix Shipkovich. I'm a principal at Shipkovich PLLC. It's a law firm based in New York with offices in Miami and London. Most of my work involves providing regulatory and litigation services to different facets of the debt relief industry, as well as other areas of law. Thank you.
Timothy.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Tim Hernandez, 36 years in the industry, debt collections, 17 years here at DSI, Debt Settlement Infobank as the CEO and founder. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, Russell.
Russell Spain, Virginia Bureau of Financial Institutions. We oversee the examinations and regulations of debt settlement services providers. I've been with the division for almost 30 years.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, hi. John McNamara, currently Chief Growth Officer for startup Obtal, which provides digital marketing engagement services for late-stage servicing and debt collections. Prior to that, I was a senior executive at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I was there for 11 years, where I worked on Regulation F, and also initiated the Bureau's coverage of the debt settlement and the consumer credit counseling space. So very invested in this particular area. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Brooke?
Hi, I'm Brooke Teal. I am Chief Compliance Officer and Deputy Chief Legal Officer at PCA Global Ventures. PCA Global Ventures is the parent company to Phillips & Co. and Associates. We are a debt collector. We have been integrating with debt settlement companies for quite some time, and representing creditors as well, trying to be that bridge with the two industries.
Thank you. Isaac?
Isaac Schloss, Chief Product Officer at Contact Center Compliance. Most people know us as DNC.com. I've been in the contact center and customer engagement industry for over a quarter of a century, working in any vertical that there is, including debt collection. At DNC.com, we provide technology and educational resources that help business comply with complex regulations regarding interacting with consumers over the telephone, as well as solutions to help improve call delivery.
Thank you so much. Kelsey?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Kelsey Hammock. I'm with the Utah Division of Consumer Protection. We're an agency here in Utah that is focused on enforcing and regulating unfair business practices. And we also register industries such as debt settlement providers.
And then last but not least, Nate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nate Woodward. I work alongside Kelsey Hammock in the Utah Division of Consumer Protection. We're part of the Department of Commerce and oversee regulatory registrations, specifically with debt management, along with other industries that are housed within the Department of Commerce.
Perfect. So those are the speakers that we have today. And before we get started, I just want to go over something real quick. It's something that Felix sent out in his newsletter yesterday. I also posted it on LinkedIn. So before we get started, I just want to quickly point out why this conversation matters right now. So according to that post that I made and Felix sent out yesterday, according to WebRecon's April 2026 data, consumer protection lawsuits are trending in an upward manner. The TCPA was up 16.6%, the FDCPA was up 9.2%, and the FCRA was up 4.6%. So year to date, those numbers are even more telling with the TCPA, FDCPA, and FCRA because litigations are all up compared to last year. Even the CFPB complaints are up more than 40% year to date. So class actions also remain a major concern, especially under TCPA, where they made up over 77% of lawsuits filed in April. So what does that tell us? It tells us that compliance is not slowing down. Lawsuits, complaints, credit reporting issues, call compliance, and consumer protection concerns are all still very active. That's why today's conversation is so important. Debt settlement and credit collections need to communicate better, document better, build compliance into the process from the beginning. So like I said earlier, one standard, two industries, bringing trust through compliance. So with that being said, from anybody's perspectives that's here on the panel, what assumptions does the other side often get wrong, in your opinion?
Felix, do you mind if I jump in?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, so this is something I think I jumped in before you did, but I want to add some context around that. CFPB complaints are up; they're actually way up, and this I think is a problem for this industry, and I think it's a problem for policymakers. So whenever I get a chance to sort of get my 2 cents on this, and I do, there is a general conflation between debt settlement and credit repair. And at an industry event recently, I asked a very senior federal regulator about credit repair, and even this person immediately or conflated it to debt. He went right from credit repair to debt settlement. And again, being on the inside of the CFPB, being a former debt collector, I know that many of the complaints to the CFPB are driven by that. And then Felix also probably knows firsthand that there are sort of, I always parse this as two different consumer plaintiffs bars. There's what I call the noble consumer plaintiffs bar, and they're going to sue anyone that for anything where they think their customer is being abused and harmed. And then there is a for-profit consumer plaintiffs bar that really focuses on technical violations of the TCPA, the FCRA, and the FDCPA. And I think it's important to sort of look at those numbers and parse them. I led the effort to get WebRecon as a vendor for the CFPB, and immediately people said, "Oh, so we can find all these bad actors from the lawsuits against them." I said, "Well, yes and no. There are lawsuits against the bad actors, definitely, but there are also attacks paid by responsible providers over these technical violations, and I really want the market monitoring group at the CFPB to sort of parse that and understand that there are violations of, say, font size, things like that, where consumer harm is obviously if the font size is ridiculously small, that's one thing. But if the font size is, say, 12 point instead of 14, and there isn't a standard period where someone's just making it up and saying, 12 is too small, it should be 16, that's an issue. So I'm all about context. I'm all about this industry and any industry making sure that there's understanding by consumers and policymakers of the differences between credit repair and debt settlement.
You going to add to that, Felix?
Yeah, no, John makes excellent points. I don't particularly deal directly with the debt collection, the creditor space, just because the marketplace I represent primarily and substantially are either debt relief companies, debt val companies, debt validation. The term is debt val. Marketing companies, front ends, and payments companies. So I don't get a chance to deal with the other side as much. But I can tell you that, generally there still seems to be a significant amount of confusion about the debt relief space. And John rightfully pointed out that many regulators bunch everyone into the same, like what I call bowl of spaghetti, and they really just don't intend to differentiate between the two. So an excellent point that John made is distinguishing credit repair, for instance, from the traditional consumer debt relief services. But if we want to add, more debt relief service into the mix, we have debt validation, which is very different than credit repair, and it's different. It actually could overlap with credit repair, but it doesn't have to overlap with credit repair. It's also could be viewed to be a debt relief product, but yet it's not a debt settlement product. And also, on top of that, we also have to be mindful that we have consumer bankruptcy, which is still and continues to be a debt relief product and is often ignored when discussing debt relief. In fact, according to the bankruptcy code, consumer bankruptcy lawyers are required to provide on all of their communications, including email, a specific disclaimer indicating that they're providing debt relief services. And if you want to throw a wrench into this mix, where I see there's very little being distinguished between not just those different market participants, but also we have the attorneys who provide these services, and attorneys are regulated by the judiciary. And I actually had a piece published today on Law 360, where the states are attempting, particularly California, Colorado, and Illinois. Illinois and Colorado legislation is already passed, trying to regulate the attorney behavior, attorney activities, while not directly related to the debt relief space, but nonetheless something that, in my opinion, is problematic and should be left for the judiciary. So the attorney is also part of that group, but yet they're separated and regulated by a different body. Renauld, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm interested in what Brooke has to say on that as well. Like sometimes when I sit at these roundtables that we have at the conferences, a lot of the stuff that I hear, I mean, we've all heard them because we've all sat at the same table, is that the confusion that they have between each other is one is upfront fees, right? Is that debt settlement charge upfront fees, or they force the consumer into a product, or they're not, debt settlement isn't regulated. Those types of issues are things that I hear that are confusing on both sides.
Yeah, I think there's a lack of transparency, a lack of communication. I think both sides think that their standpoints are obvious. I'm on the board of the Women's Financial Services Collective, previously Women of Debt Relief. And what we're doing is getting women, strong women from collaborative businesses and compliant businesses together to have real conversations. I think sometimes when we're at a round table or a CRC meeting, people, the sides can kind of get defensive, and sometimes the conversations aren't as collaborative as we would like. So I think getting genuine connections of people on both sides. I mean, we're having a webinar right now on how to bridge. People want to be the bridge. We want to work together. But I think maybe having more genuine connections and being able to really talk through exactly what the life cycle of the account is for the consumer, exactly what a day in the life is for the person working at that debt settlement company, exactly what the day in the life is of a person working at a creditor. I think the more connections that are made, the better understanding we're going to have of what the fee structure is or what that looks like for a consumer.
Do you think, and this is just not even one of my questions that I wrote out, but just you saying that, do you think that a course should be taken by somebody on the credit and collection side that deals with negotiation, so they understand exactly how negotiation is, the process of the consumer getting into that program? Because I know that in debt settlement, when they take their certification program, they learn about the process of collections, the 30, 60, 90-day buckets, just the whole flow of collections. So you think it would better help the credit and collections agent be able to understand the process a little bit better?
think ideally, yes. I think all of us go through, whether you're at a collection agency or at a creditor, you go through a myriad of trainings, right? But I think a genuine interest in what that looks like, a genuine interest in what it looks like for the consumer, is really a good way to focus on it instead of, this is how debt settlement works. No, this is the consumer is contacting, the consumer is going through this. What does this look like for the consumer? I think is sometimes a better way to approach it than, oh, there should be a required training. Doesn't mean that they're going to want to be at that training and pay attention to that training.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to jump on that topic, or
just on the training topic? If I could have my, again, having been a federal regulator, there are variations on a theme when there are problems between debt relief providers and the consumer. And there's really kind of two big themes. And one is anything that smacks of trying to get to early revenue recognition, right, in conflict with the TSR. And the other one is sort of this bait and switch thing, and where the consumer may come in thinking it's a consolidation loan, but it's debt settlement. And those agents need to be like, they should almost learn from prior enforcement actions and what went wrong, sort of to give them some context on how they could inadvertently, in trying to hurt the consumer, trigger the attention of the regulators. This is a kind of an esoteric example, but within the Department of the Interior is the United Bureau of Mines, and they used to actually publish these things, Renaud, called deathograms. And it was a way to teach miners to be more safe by actually de-identifying and telling stories of various miners who had been killed by doing generally dumb things. But sort of the past mistakes are a wonderful teacher. So don't make them your experience. Use them as your teacher to make sure that anybody interacting with a consumer, or a creditor for that matter, is aware of these things that have gone wrong. So that's my 2 cents. And thanks for letting me share it.
Yeah. So there's two things. One, I want to kind of go back to what Brooke was talking about. And so she was talking about the making sure that the consumer was looked after more, and the experience of the consumer. So what changes can we make between credit and collections and debt settlement? What's one change that can immediately improve trust between both industries to help the consumer?
I think that a lot of it comes down to ethics and your approach to the consumer market. And when you're in this type of space, it's tricky. We're not talking about selling a product. We're not talking about customer service. We're talking about solving a problem. And it's not even a comfortable problem for most people involved. I started my career, and I still consider myself this part of my career, is in technology. And when you're in technology, especially security, you quickly learn that your biggest security risk is your human factor. While your employees are your most valuable asset, they're also your biggest risk. And a lot of security breaches come in because the employee did something silly, stupid, careless, however you want to catalog it. So from a regulatory risk perspective, it's the same thing that you have to ask yourself. As an employer, as somebody in the C-suite, how am I enabling my staff? How am I better preparing my team to represent my organization to the consumer market for whatever that purpose is? Am I providing the proper education to the prior topic? But then beyond that, what type of experience am I creating? Is it an aggressive and almost abusive scenario? Am I calling far too often as a business? Am I trying to hide who I am and why I'm calling to get them to answer the phone and tricking them to be on? So adding a little bit more transparency, being a little bit more upfront about who you are. Yes, there are pros and cons to that strategy that can be discussed, but there are a lot of opportunities to try to create a better and more inviting experience, to create a better experience for the consumer, which will then lead towards a higher level of trust.
So is that a lack of training, or how do companies train their teams to explain the program clearly without making promises that can't be guaranteed?
Well, see, that's right there, though. That's it. You get so many people in the calling space today that try to be scrappy entrepreneurs that are trying to try something new to get past some barrier nobody's thought to get through before. But to John's point, they probably have tried to get through that barrier before, and they ran smack into the wall when they tried to jump over it. So having that training around where their limits are is a great starting point. But then also evaluating your technology structure. Everybody's all about AI today. AI is going to change the world. And I genuinely believe that. But throwing AI in the face of every person you're trying to call, aside from the legal ramifications of that, are you creating great experience? Are you being transparent? You've got the laws on caller ID transmission and things like that, but are you taking a step further and trying to put a trusted brand name on there and trying to really elevate that clarity of who you are? And that's some of the things that I would recommend. Obviously, I'd love to hear from the rest of the group.
Anybody?
Renaud, I would add, like what jumps into my mind initially in this world of the consumer, the creditor, the debt relief provider, and the regulator is data. And we're at a point now with the ability to share data through various providers, like Plaid. And certainly CFPB, it's been working on a rule on Section 1033. There's always been a lack of trust, in my view, going back to the earliest days of monitoring this at the CFPB, and even as a collector working Citibank portfolios, where the information is imperfect, so the creditor doesn't always feel like they're being represented well. The debt relief company has some data, but not all from the consumer. And again, we're at a point now where the flow of data can be so much greater with proper governance, with proper privacy concerns, that basically the creditor, the debt relief company, the consumer could all be looking at the same full set of data to make responsible, reasoned decisions about solutions that are best for the consumer.
Mm-hmm. And I know Isaac was talking about this a little bit, but where do companies unintentionally cross the line into UDAP risk? And this is for any Russell, Nate, Kelsey, Isaac, any of you guys. And where do you see companies unintentionally crossing the line into debt settlement? And I think John kind of went on this too. Is it the bait and switch and not knowing that you're actually doing a bait and switch, or is it something that an agent might say on the phone? Where do you see it happening the most?
In my experience, a lot of times it's allowing a bad behavior to continue by not catching that bad behavior. So you may have someone who was properly trained, but hey, I don't know about you guys, I don't remember 100% of the things I'm told. It's usually closer to like 99.9%. So sometimes you need that reinforcement, right? So do you have internal processes where you are monitoring the calls, you are coaching them, and you are trying to course correct? Mistakes are going to get made in your organization, but are you taking proactive steps to try to identify those as quickly as possible so you can stop them from repeating? That is a big gap that I see. A lot of companies are cutting budgets these days to try to boost margins or just try to compete in a competitive landscape. Where they're making a lot of the cuts is some of that due diligence that needs to be going on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, just to piggyback on Isaac there, that was going to be my comment, is compliance checks and the ongoing training. It's not just that initial training, and the willingness to make it right when there has been a mistake made. The unintentionally crossing the line for us in Utah, intent doesn't necessarily matter. So even if you're not intending to cross the line and you did, we're still going to have to address that. And we most often see the misrepresentation occurring at the point of sale, or taking the money and then failing to deliver the services afterwards. And those are the most common, but those are also pretty easy to resolve just by not doing that.
And to piggyback on,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just want to piggyback on what Kelsey said, because that's an incredibly important point. Is intent is what's that expression? The path, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, or something like that. It's very critical for a lot of people to realize that you might be in a space, or you might be doing work such as this, where you say, hey, there are certain exemptions that I have under the TCPA that don't apply to me because I'm in collections. But what if you're calling a phone number that doesn't belong to your debtor or the person you're trying to reach, and there's a lawsuit that's filed. You say, well, hey, it's a collections call, so it doesn't apply to me. The issue here is that while your intention was that you were making a call to this specific person, since it wasn't that person, your intention doesn't matter. Same thing with, a business to business call versus a business to consumer call. Just because you intended to go down a certain path, where you ended up is a lot of times what is the matter that is being addressed by the court.
Yeah, Renaud, I'll add some to that.
Okay.
From a regulator standpoint, first off, compliance starts, it's a culture. It has started at the top and then filter down to the entire organization. And from there, the protections are usually in place for the consumers. And saying that, and to echo really what Isaac and Kelsey said, where the intent may not be there, or it doesn't matter to us as regulators. We have to be objective and not subjective. And in doing that and applying the law, we have to allow, businesses to operate and for consumers to be protected. So, applying the law accurately and cohesively is important as a regulator. So I agree with Kelsey and Isaac and protecting the consumers, but still allowing these companies to operate in a space that's regulated.
Yeah, we have the CFPB that enforces unfair or UDAP. We have TSR that makes sure that in the disclosures there's no advance fee. We have the states that oversee the licensings and certifications. But still there's a misunderstanding that debt settlement isn't really regulated. And if they are regulated, there's no penalties that go along with them doing something wrong. Is that a true statement, that there's no penalty that happens to them if they do anything wrong? I've seen the articles. I know that debt settlement companies and credit and collection companies both get penalized equally, but for some reason there's an illusion out there that that you can do these things without any penalty.
No, that's not the case. The law is very specific in allowing us to impose certain sort of regulatory actions. And if you violate the law and you do it systemically, we're going to recommend that the imposition of that regulatory action be approved by the commission. And so, yeah, we've been regulating debt settlement. I'm not familiar with debt collectors. I'm not on that side. We don't license those here at our agency. But at our agency, we have 11 licensees. The law was enacted on July 1st of 2022. We've conducted 18 exams since then. The law requires us to do exams every 3 years. We do it on a 2-year cycle. So yeah, they're regulated. If they violate the law, we'll impose regulatory actions. So I disagree that they're not regulated and that actions aren't being taken if violations are discovered.
And I'd just like to add, I think regulators are looking at the entire consumer ecosystem now more holistically. They're looking to see whether all parties involved in the chain are maintaining appropriate oversight, appropriate consumer protections. And to that end, they're also moving away, I think, from check the box compliance and focusing on the consumer experience, the consumer outcome. Yeah, you made the disclosure, but did the consumer actually understand it? I think just holistically, we're seeing regulator involvement protecting that consumer, and it doesn't necessarily matter which piece you are. You're not getting out of the ecosystem. You're not getting out of the enforcement and the oversight.
There's a great story, and again, going back to what John was saying about learning from other people's mistakes. Melody Stoops, she went out and there's a Forbes article about her making 6 figures a year. She had a box of cell phones she carried around with her. It was 35 cell phones in a shoebox. And she got them in a market that was heavily depressed in the financial market. And they were getting a lot of debt collection calls. And these were calls where there was all the proper authorization. There were the exemptions, the signatures, the whole 9 yards. except that those phone numbers didn't belong to the people that signed those agreements anymore. So they received calls using what was considered regulated technologies. We call it technology that is under the scope of the TCPA when used to communicate with consumers. And she was generating lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit because there was violations being done. And again, it goes down to what happened, not the intent. So it is regulated, and there are very easy ways to step out of line if you're not taking the proper precautions to minimize your risk.
I was just going to add that even with the CFPB, which is a much smaller, less active entity right now, Mark Paletta, who is just recently named as the deputy director, and is likely to run the CFPB after August 10th when Russell Vogt has to roll off. Like they very clear, FDCPA, FCRA are still going to be front and center. And again, I think Tim Hernandez had the most years in industry. I'm going to top him at 43 years in industry. So I've been through cycles of deregulatory administrations and ones that wanted to crack down. Certain industries really never see an easing up. And certainly, I think debt relief, debt collections, debt sales are industries that they're not going to see that right now. They're still always in the eye of the federal regulators. And as we've seen recently with the appointment of Rohit Chopra to run the umbrella agency for consumer protection in California, if the states feel that the federal government isn't doing a sufficient job, they will indeed step up and step in.
Kelsey or Nate, did you want to jump on that at all?
Yeah, I'll just echo what's been said here. It's definitely regulated. In Utah, we have about 32 active debt
Yeah, about
provider
35 or so.
And then we also have some credit service organizations, which is related to this topic. They're also registered, and we can issue fines under both of those statutes. The debt management actually is more potential fine than we're typically allowed to impose. Typically, we're capped at $2,500 per violation, but under the specific Debt Management Protection Act here in Utah, we can fine up to $10,000 per violation. And we can order the provider to return any money collected to the affected consumer. We can suspend, deny, revoke your registration. We had a CSO that just settled with us at the end of 2025 and paid a reduced fine of $35,000, and that was reduced. So there's definitely regulation out there.
Okay. In your guys' opinion, where do consumers typically get hurt in the current system that we have right now?
I think I heard the Federal Trade Commission outline that recently, and I think do they understand, are they making an informed decision? Do they have the sufficient information to understand what the outcomes look like? So you almost can't do enough in the way of disclosures. And again, being a former federal regulator, it's interesting that one of the things I'll never forget was we were talking about disclosures for various laws. In this case, it was FDCPA and Regulation F, the implementing rule for the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. One of the attorneys said disclosures aren't for the receiver, they're for the sender. And in that sense, Renaud, if you have to send that disclosure, you're putting it in writing what you will or will not do. And therefore, you're creating, very black and white legal liability if you deviate from that disclosure.
Hmm. What processes can companies implement to prevent legal issues before they happen? I believe I sent this to all you guys. I've sent it to a couple of other people too. I know that ACDR and RMAI, they have standards for both of their industries, for the debt settlement industry and the credit collection industry. But do you believe that there should be, to help prevent legal issues and to help a consumer get through the program, should there be standards between the two industries that they should have between each other, like standard rules in order for us to do business with you as credit and collections and debt settlement here are the rules that we have to play by.
I'll jump in. I'm going to probably say something that many people disagree, but it is my view. I don't believe in these standards. I come from a commodities and security space. I spent some time working in the insurance space. Industry organizations and associations don't create those rules or standards. It's really up to the regulators to create those rules and standards and for the courts to create those legal precedents.
I don't know if I agree, and I love the perspective, Felix. So my opinion is, perhaps there's opportunity for the industry to clean up their own act so that the regulators don't have to step in and do it for them. I've seen a lot of times, and again, my entire career has been in telemarketing, and I've seen a lot of abuse. I've seen a lot of people doing just horribly abusive calling, going back to the 1990s. I mean, that's why we've got the TCPA. And I think that if industry organizations had enough influence and enough reach to get the would-be good actors to follow the rules and to do things, or the rules, the standards that have been defined that have the proper intersection of legitimate business needs with consumer rights and consumer fairness, it may create a little bit less burden on the regulators. Now, that's not to say we don't need a regulatory framework. You need clear and understandable rules so that we know what's allowed, what's not allowed, so that you're not making up the rules as you go in court, which is often what happens in case law. But relying on the law can be tricky at times because depending on the regulation, it can be slightly ambiguous as to, is this behavior allowed? Is this behavior not allowed? And if you're simply watching enforcement trends or case history to decide which way of that argument you should go on, you might find yourself on the wrong end if perhaps something had laid dormant with enforcement for 5 years and then all of a sudden there's a gigantic crackdown on it.
Yeah, I agree with Isaac's point. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, Brooke, please, after you.
Thanks. I was just going to say, standards establish a baseline of professionalism and expectations. Those standards create consistency in how regulations are interpreted, how they're operationalized. It also just signals that the industry values ethical practices, documentation standards, education, and it just shows that they're trying to do the right thing. So I'm all in support of uniform standards. Go ahead, John. Sorry.
And I'm splitting the difference. I agree with Isaac, you, Brooke, but I also agree with Felix. They're helpful, but they don't solve the problem entirely. Again, as a former regulator, there's a tendency to think of an industry as an animal, and we particularly care about the tail. And you'll hear them talk about the long tail problem, where you've got a lot of small players, and the barrier to entry into the industry is super easy. They may be less capitalized. They may have less skin in the game. And a lot of times, some of the most horrific abuse in any industry comes from these very small edge players. And I think RMAI did a very good job of, it didn't stop the CFPB from standing up. It didn't stop Reg F from rolling out. But I found it very helpful when someone would come to me and talk about these evil bill collectors. And yeah, there are evil bill collectors, but they would say, well, they are convincing consumers to pay a small token amount on a time-barred debt, or an out-of-statute debt, rather, to begin retolling it so that they can litigate that account. And that was a practice that the RMAI made its members swear that they would not participate in. Also, if you're running a trade association with standards, like my favorite question as a regulator is, okay, give me 5 people you've kicked out of your organization in the last 5 years.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because I was trying to get at
historically, I apologize to jump in, but give me a single trade association that has ever kicked out any member. I probably have seen that on the security side because that industry has been around for a couple of hundred years.
Exactly. And literally the entire pitch deck on the certification just collapses in on itself. But you sort of have to be willing to walk the walk, talk the talk. And again, if you've invested in your trade association, you can't let this small edge player glom onto the imprimatur of your brand by just saying, hey, we're a member of this, even though you really don't police it. So that's my 2 cents. They have value. They have value definitely in creating a vernacular to speak to regulators and to sort of parse out what your members do and what they don't. But they don't solve everything.
And John's point about kicking out the regulator or kicking out the bad actors, I think is very critical because while I completely agree with that, I think that's a slight deviation from what Brooke said, which I thought was an excellent point, that the operationalization of regulation. So it's one thing to have the rules that have been defined by the regulatory body, by Congress, by whomever, but it's another to say, okay, this is how we're going to interpret and we're going to recommend you enact that. So that operational aspect that Brooke brought up, critical. And I think that's where the value add is. Now, to John's point, and Felix, which you backed up, and I've had the same argument with trade groups before. I've served on a number of boards. I chair government affairs currently for one now. If you're going to have a program of certification, you're going to have that gold seal of compliance you're going to stamp on someone, then you have to have the kicking them out portion of it. And I think that's critical. That's slightly different, I think, from Brooke's perspective of operationalizing, because it's when, hey, this is how we believe is the most effective way to do it. That may not necessarily mean that that's something you have to agree to follow to be a member of the club, but certainly if you're getting a gold seal of compliance or certification or whatever from the club, then you have to have that real audit and that real consequence for those that don't. If you don't, I agree completely, Felix and John, then it's worthless as a gold seal of approval.
Yeah, I know that with us, with IAPDA, if you get your agent certified and then that certification expires and it's never renewed, or all of your agents aren't certified, then you're no longer on our platform. You're kicked off the platform. So when people go to our website and they go to check to see if an agent's certified, we're not going to leave an expired agent's name on there and make it seem like they're certified when they're not. If you're not being compliant, then we take you off.
Just another point for maybe the providers in this space, and again, this is sort of the entrance of AI and how it can be helpful. And I met a provider. I'm not going to say their name because I'm not. I don't want to run a commercial for anybody in this space, but they were taking the CFPB complaints to lawsuits. They were taking all social media fields, and they were basically, usually marketing uses those kind of things for like a constant running reputation dashboard. But a trade association that sort of is constantly looking for any sort of news, good or bad, about its members through any feed, X rather, is the world's largest complaint database. So watching that for mentions, watching the CFPB complaint database, watching the lawsuits, as well as Yelp and Google reviews are a great way to sort of continue, if you're really serious about creating members that adhere to a set of standards and don't deviate. I think that would be helpful. And with the state of data analysis and screen scraping of widely available sources, all that's very doable.
I feel like John's creating a new standard of know your member. So we have know your customer, know your vendor, and now we've got know your member. I love it.
I mean, the CFPB got a lot of people got in trouble under the player knew or should have known. So willful ignorance is definitely, that's also the path to hell.
Absolutely.
So what data do you guys can legally be shared between settlement companies and collectors? I know some of these companies. I know Brooke and Tim, you guys both have processes. What type of data can legally be shared between the two companies?
I'd like to jump in if that's okay, Renauld, and good afternoon, everyone. From a DSI perspective, this is a topic that's really near and dear to us. First and foremost, I think it's important or really imperative that we have our compliance departments, more importantly, the chief attorney, review our processes, because there really isn't a one point of reference to determine whether or not you're being compliant with data sharing. All right, there's a catalog of rules and regulations, both at the federal and state level. If I was to call out a few federal areas, you would want to look at GLBA, FTC, FCRA, FDCPA, and so forth, safeguards, etc. If I was to say, well, we also need to ensure that we're compliant at the state level, I would say there are probably 19 states and counting that have some type of SSN restriction or data privacy laws that have been deployed. I would name or list California, New York, Texas, Utah, Virginia, Colorado, as a few others. So when we talk about data exchange, there's really two topics, I think, that we should cover. One would be the vehicle and how that data is moving back and forth, and then the NPI or PII that's being shared with the other party. all of those are really governed under these different catalogs of rules and regulations. I had someone ask me, Tim, do you have a cheat sheet of what I should look at? And I sat back and kind of chuckled and I said, well, I think there's 7, but they're massive, right? So when we talk about data sharing, what I try to prioritize for everyone is say, first look at GLBA, see what your permissible purpose is, be familiar with the FTC Act, CFPA, state privacy laws, as well as state SSN protections, but make sure, FTC safeguards is understood as well as FCRA. But the last thing I'll say, and I want to pass it over to Brooke, is it's a heavy lift when we talk about data sharing. And many of us on both sides of the fence will leverage a vendor for payment processing, one for skip tracing, one for dialer technology, letters, etc. There are also service providers out there in the market that will provide the service so that you don't have to create that data exchange yourself and worry about compliance, right? Focus on what we do best, which is settling debt and or collecting money. And many of those services are cost friendly and again, very compliant. Brooke, what do you think?
I think you made the big points on the technical pieces of the data exchange. The only point that I would add is for the debt settlement companies to ensure that their power of attorney or their agreement with the consumer directly actively reflects what you're doing with that consumer's data, which is, it kind of goes back to a UDAP point, right? Do they understand and have they agreed to it?
Tim mentioned, the 19 state regulations. I'll say and counting, right? So these things are changing all the time. So what is your internal business process for reviewing your end user agreements, for reviewing your processes around data sharing? These things change very quickly, and having this mismatch patchwork of regulations doesn't make it very easy to keep track of it on your own. So are you bringing in a specialized attorney to come in and look at that, or do you have somebody in-house that has the right the right specialty, the right training to be able to review all of that and update it on a regular basis?
Isaac, that's a really interesting point. The thing that I would go back to, and I think Brooke's team has done an outstanding job, is in today's world we would not create an internal process or department for payment processing or any of the other services that we outsource. So I fear that someone may look at 1 or 2 of the federal regulations and miss the other 9 state regulations. So for us, being that data is our life, right? So that's our core business for a multitude of data points. We always try to listen, understand, and try to determine, is it something you truly should build out internally? Or is it something you should outsource, as you do with many of the other procedures that you have internally, so that you allow the experts to ensure that you're compliant? Because the consumer journey was really at the forefront of much of what we had to say. And I think it's important to ensure that the consumer's data is secure, that he or she experiences that life cycle of debt settlement and exits knowing that their data was protected along the way, they've graduated, and life is golden, which is, I think, what we all want on both sides of the fence.
Yeah, Tim, that's a great point. I'm going to say, don't do this. Don't try this at home. And to underscore your point about outsourcing it to people that's their full-time day job problem to solve. You probably no one on this call remembers Retrieval Masters, a large collector of medical diagnostic debt that had the great idea to build their own payment portal. And they built it, and it had vulnerabilities, and it was exploited. And MasterCard, Visa, and Amex numbers were spread all over the dark web. And then I think they knew or should have known that it happened, and they didn't report it. And again, they're bankrupt after just a horrific ordeal for both them, but more importantly for the consumers that they hurt. So I will also say this: when you look at both sides of the aisle and consumer protection, there is a lot of common cause around data privacy. And at the heart of AI is really data privacy and data governance. the data you have, do you have a right to have it? Should you have it? Can you prove that you have express consent where express consent's needed from the consumer to possess that data? So again, it's best not, that's not a deep DIY project. So stay out of Home Depot, go to the professionals.
Okay, I want to move to the consumer because in just a couple of consumer questions. Um, excuse me. So both industries align around the consumer, compliance should flow naturally. So everything comes back to this. Regulators don't care about your model, they care about the consumer outcome. Transparency, meaning a clear settlement offer and realistic expectations. Financial education, that should be a compliance requirement, not a bonus. And avoiding redefault. So strong long-term outcomes and stronger recovery. How do we make sure that the process gives consumers a clear information instead of adding more confusion to the problem that they already have?
Renault, one of the things that I hear, right? So John and I worked together many, many lifetimes ago. So we both started off as bill collectors on the phones. But one of the things that I hear, and I'll share in transparency, my daughter leveraged that settlement and she was very happy with the outcome. But one of the biggest things for her was that she went in unsure that all of her accounts were going to be resolved. Mm-hmm. So when she left, and my daughter, as everyone knows, passed away, she left with a lot of medical debt that was unresolved. It was her hope, and I think many consumers, that when you join that settlement, that it'll be almost like a bankruptcy, right? It's all inclusive. So I think when I'm listening to phone calls, as I do at the other company we own and operate, that's always one of the biggest things. We do a lot of medical debt. Dare I say, used to be called payday loans, small balances. I think those are some of the things, as we talk high level and very intelligently about regulations and laws, let's get down to the consumer level and then understand when he or she graduates, are they fully done with all of the debt that they've accumulated? And I think often that answer is no. So now they have to figure it out. So I think that's kind of one of the common threads that I hear from consumers on phone calls. And as I said, firsthand experience, but I'll pass it over to you all to see what you think.
I know for me, when I've worked in heavily regulated spaces, aside from just how heavily regulated the telephone is, I'll listen to a script, like let's say insurance, for example. I'll listen to the script and I could tell what part of the script was written by marketing and what part was written by legal. The part written by marketing, it's super clear. It's very like, hey, we're going to do this and you're going to get this and it's going to be the blue box and it's all peppy and great. And then you get to the legalese and it is dry, it is dense, it is hard to take it all in. So are you taking any steps to try to bridge that gap and make sure that it meets the legal requirements? Obviously, you have to do that, but are you also matching the spirit and intent of the law in that you're creating a transparent environment for the consumer? When I worked for a company that was in the education vertical primarily, our philosophy around that was KISS, keep it simple, stupid, or keep it stupid, simple, whichever you prefer. But it was depending on who was being talked to. But it was, the idea was you want to be able to explain this to where your typical consumer, not somebody who's got a PhD or somebody who's got a law degree, can understand it. Make it transparent enough to where anybody can understand it and there can be no question as to what you said was what you meant.
And Isaac, I love that because in debt collections, we talk about the least knowledgeable consumer, right? Ensuring that they understand exactly what their rights are as a consumer. And I hate to say the word debtor, but it's important because as we read some of these agreements, your average, term average Joe, I'm showing my age, may not always understand what they're signing up for and what they're receiving throughout that process.
So you say that right now, and I'm not making any plugs or anything, but I created a course just for that, for the consumer, so that they can learn about every debt debt relief product that's out there for them, and then they can make the decision from that. So it tells them the rules, how long it's going to take, what the requirements are to qualify, all these other different things. And then once they finish that, then they can choose what program that they want to be in.
I think that's wonderful. Now it probably needs to be marketed more and pushed out because, debt settlement's growing by leaps and bounds. We look at the state of the economy, gas prices, cost of goods, bankruptcy is not an option. So the more knowledge consumers have to make an intelligent decision, I think is super valuable. So what you have is fantastic. Now it needs to be pushed out into the hands of the consumer. How do they find that information?
Exactly. And then, well, I think I was gonna ask a couple more questions, but we are 1000% out of time. So I just wanted to thank all the speakers for sharing your insight, your experience, your perspectives, and thank everyone for showing up for the webinar. I'm going to try and do a webinar once every quarter about certain topics. They'll mainly be about bridging the gap between debt settlement and credit and collections, because I truly believe that if those two industries work more cohesively, it will be a better outcome for the consumer, and make it so that the process isn't so hard for the consumer to go through. I mean, this is a very stressful process. I know Brooke feels the same way that I feel about it. The consumer should not have to go through all these hoops and headaches and worrying about summonses and being sued just to try and get out of the debt. They're trying to resolve the issue at hand because they're going through a hardship. And I sometimes going through that hardship and getting into a debt relief program, the hardship becomes even harder for them because of all the stuff that they have to go to. So if we can bridge the gap, we can make it a little bit easier for them so that they can graduate the program and be successful in life. But thank you guys again. I really appreciate it. I know every time I talk to you guys, I say how much I appreciate it. This means a lot to me. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you everybody that came to the webinar and watched. Thank you, and we will speak to you later.